Hello everyone. So today we will be talking about introduction to modeling in Maya 2017, or really in any Maya you will be using from now on. So there's a couple of topics we want to cover in this video. It's going to be another one of those which is quite long, but it's for a reason, so please stick with it for a little while. So the topics we will be discussing today include setting up a project, saving in increments, different selection modes, world space and object space, polygonal shading, soft, hard, reverse normals and how to fix those, n-gons and how to fix those, extrude operation, double faces, deleting things, and the last point will be mirroring geometry. So without further ado, let's take a look at what we've got here in our Maya. So as I promised, the first thing we will be talking about is setting up a project. So whenever you start working on something new, it's always a good idea to set up a project, a space for Maya to hold all of your preferences about this particular project, about this particular task. And really, without having a project, Maya can struggle with a lot of things, and you will be running into very nasty errors if you don't set it up properly. So I will show you how to do it and how to make sure that every time you go back to Maya, you continue working with the same project, or at least you know how to create a new one. So to be able to do that, the first thing, the first time you do this, of course, you will need to set up a new project. So that project will hold all the necessary information that Maya needs. We will need to go under File and then Project window. And so over here, as you can see at the moment, it's showing me my current project. So for you, it probably will be the default project. But here we have this new button. So if you click it, it will give you this new project. So what we can call this very first project you will be working with is class projects. So we will be using the same project for different little things we will be modeling throughout this course. Instead of creating a new project for each of them, it will be enough just to have this one folder containing all of the information we need. So as you can see here, it also has the location we need. So for me, this is the perfect location. It works really well. It's just going to be sitting in your documents and then Maya. And Maya already by default has this folder called projects, not to confuse with Maya's own project space. And in there, I store all of my projects. So this is going to be another one, which I will delete after that, because I have other projects set up for that. So in here you can see all the different folders that Maya will be creating. Sometimes if you want to save a little bit of memory, you can just get rid of any of the folders you think you will not be using. So it's pretty safe to get rid of, for example, clips and potentially movies, for example, maybe translator, data, time editor. And to do that, all you have to do is just to leave those spaces blank. And it means that Maya will not be creating those folders. You don't really need to worry about any of the other settings, so you can leave everything as is by default as well. It's not going to ruin anything. So after that, all you have to do is to click Accept. And just to confirm where we're sitting at the moment, and this is what you will have to do every time you open Maya, just to confirm that you're in the right project space. You will have to go under File and Set Projects, just at the very bottom. So you will see that I have quite a lot of them, and the one I just created will be my class projects. So all you have to do is to navigate to the top folder, and by top folder, as you can see, I mean the folder containing all of those little folders we just created. So you just have to navigate to it and click on it once and click Set. So this will let Maya know all the preferences, absolutely everything you will be working with. So in terms of preferences, if you are ever wondering where you can find those, you probably won't be needing them for some time yet, but I will just show you where to find them. It's going to be under Windows and Setting and Preferences and Preferences. So over here you can specify quite a lot of different things. For example, settings is probably the most commonly used one. where you can set up which dimensions you're working with. So for example, at the moment we're setting in centimeter, meaning that each grid square is equal to 1 centimeter. I usually prefer working in meters, but to be honest, it doesn't matter too much until you start rigging. So as long as you don't forget to set this to whatever you will be working with later on, you can keep this as it is for now. Same thing with the degrees. Degrees are usually fine, you don't need to change them. Time, at the moment it's setting at film, which is probably what animation students want. I keep this to 30 FPS because I work with games, and it's the standard setting for the games. Also for animation, you will have to go to time slider as well at some point and just make sure that you're working with real time. So with your settings that we specified before, for me, if I change the settings here, it would be 30 frames per second, but it's fine for now. I will keep it as it is. Also, you can play around with the undo settings here as well. So as you can see at the moment, undo is on. And the queue is finite, meaning that we only have 50 undos before Maya runs out of them, so you cannot undo anymore. So this is one of those settings that you might want to consider and think about what works and doesn't work for you. Usually around 50 to 100 is fine, but when you start going to something that's a bit higher than 100, it means that Maya might start lagging a little bit, so just keep that in mind. And that's pretty much it. You can also just go through all of them and see which settings make sense and which don't really, and just see if you understand any of them. So that might be quite interesting. But we'll just close this for now. And you can click save if you have done some changes, and we can start working. So another thing I wanted to talk to you about is saving in increments. What I mean by that is to save your files often. So when you're working on something, it's very important to save often because Maya can crash. There might be some sort of an error which will make it crash, and then you might lose your work. So probably every maybe 5 to 10 minutes, save your work. I usually save in increments, so it means that whenever I'm happy with something, like for example I'm working on a model and I've done this particularly hard part, I will go and save it as a new version. So whenever I'm saving, I will go to Save Scene As or Ctrl-Shift-S, and I will call it, in this particular case, it can be Test 01. And as you can see, by default is navigating me directly to my scenes folder inside my class projects. So this is my Test 01. And you will get a little prompt if you're using a student version, just click OK. And let's say you've done something else, you've done incredible work on a piece of your model. After that, go and make sure you save it as a new version, so it can be Test 02. You can also specify exactly what you did, so maybe you finished piece, and then go and add 02 at the end. So this might be a little bit easier if you ever wanted to go back to something. Let's say you've done another couple of increment saves, and then you have decided that, you know what, I really like the way it was before, and you can go back and you don't need to go through all of the files trying to figure out what Test 01, Test 02, Test 03 were, because you have this little description. Just try not to make it too long, because otherwise it will just be a mess and a little bit hard to see. And so you can save it from here and just click continue. So you will notice if we go back to our saving options that there is a couple of formats available to us. So Maya binary and Maya ASCII or ASCII. So the difference between them is that Maya binary is completely, it's a binary code, so it's zeros and ones. It means that it's non-human readable. You will not be able to figure out what's happening in the file if you ever were to open it with a text editor. MA or Maya ASCII is a human readable file. So what you could do, if something keeps breaking and you're quite a technically advanced person, you know what to look for and where to look for it, you could open this file with a text editor and you would be able to figure out what's happening in the scene. So this file would show you all of the information about the scene, and you would be able to manipulate it as well, which is why it's quite cool. But it's a little bit bigger in size, it's larger compared to Maya binary or MB. So usually we prefer to work with NA files. So that's just a little piece of information for you here. And of course you can save over files as well. Just remember what we talked about at the moment. So let's talk really quickly about different modes we can work with, because what we've been doing so far, we have been just manipulating objects like this. So we have been moving them around with our W, rotating with E, and scaling with R. But we haven't really been doing any proper modeling so far. We haven't been manipulating any of the elements of this object. And this object actually consists of many elements. So let's go and take a look at them one by one. So to be able to switch between different modes, you need to hover over an object and right-click and hold. It will show you this little menu. So the things we are mostly interested in are vertex, face, edge, and object mode. So at the moment we are in the object mode, meaning that we can manipulate the object as a whole. So we are just manipulating it as this one solid thing. We can go to vertices, so I'm still holding my right mouse button and I'm just dragging this little wire to vertex, and I'm releasing the button, and this is what we get. So you can see a lot of purple dots, and if you click on any one of them, you can start manipulating them and you can start moving them around. So let's say I wanted the sphere to stop being a sphere and I wanted to make it a let's say a capsule of some sort. Of course you could just do it with scaling, but you only would be able to do it kind of uniformly in a way. So you couldn't do something like this, and you couldn't do something like this just using your scale, right? And we can also, so that was just drag selecting elements. We could also just click on one element. Also, we could click on one element, and let's say I want to select only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 vertices over here. I can press Shift and double-click on the 5th element, and it will only select those 5 ones, and I can do things with them now. If I wanted, I could select this whole row. So that is done by pressing on the first element and then Shift-clicking, Shift double-clicking on the next one. Select the whole row, and now you can do things like this. You can keep selecting like this as well. So select the first vertex just over here, and with Shift I'm double clicking the next one. Then still holding Shift I select this vertex over here, and still holding Shift double clicking the next one. And so I can select 3 rows or however many I need like this, and then I can start manipulating them and doing different things with them, which is quite cool. So that's a completely legit way of modeling things, just by manipulating vertices. And a lot of times in your career you will be thinking of yourself as of the vertex pusher, because that's what we do, we push vertices around. So we've talked about vertices a little bit. Let's talk about edges. So what's the main difference between a vertex and an edge? Edge needs at least 2 vertices to be able for us to be able to call it an edge, right? So an edge is simply just a line on your model. A line which typically has 2 vertices associated with it. If it has more, it means you might have a problem like an n-gon. An n-gon, so we'll talk about them in a second. But just remember this, a good edge is an edge with 2 vertices, one at the end of the edge and one at the start of the edge. And where the end and the start are is totally up to you to decide. So with edges, you can do pretty much the same manipulation you can do with vertices. You usually or typically don't find yourself just pushing edges around compared to pushing vertices around, at least I don't. But you will be using loops quite a lot. So by loops I mean anything that you know, has no beginning and no end. It's a proper circle, or really a loop can have an end. So if I'm just double clicking at this point, so it's a little bit easier to select. Double click this one, for example, and we've selected this particular loop which terminates at the beginning and the end of what used to be our sphere. At the moment it's like an alien shape of some sort, or maybe special detail of the mechanism. So again, we can just double click on things. We can select things the same way we did with the vertices. So click on the first element and with Shift, double click on the last one you want to get selected. If you just double click on a loop, it will select this whole loop for you. I also usually do it the same way I did with the vertices, where I click on the first element, then with a Shift pressed, I double click on the second one, it will select the whole loop for me. So it just depends on what you're more used to. And we can start manipulating our edges absolutely the same way we were doing with the vertices before. So just like this. The next method, or the next mode I wanted to talk to you about is polygons. So polygons are those little faces, and you can see our model here has a lot of them. So typically, when we talk about polygons, we talk about four-sided polygons. Sometimes, when you work in games, a polygon will mean a triangle. So that's just something to keep in mind. And depending on where you're working, when people tell you, you cannot go higher than 1,000 polygons, they actually mean that you cannot go higher than 1,000 triangles. So if you are not sure, just specify it with your manager or whoever is giving you the task. So if I select everything, as you can see over here, I have this Polycount being reflected on my screen. If you wanted to have the same, you will need to go under Display, Heads-Up Display, and here we have this Polycount, and for me it's checked on, that's why I can see what's happening with my model. So if I select everything, you will see that I have selected 400 faces, which is quite a lot. But if you remember, the original sphere is usually 20 by 20, so it makes perfect sense, we haven't deleted anything. And for triangles, it's nearly doubled. And why it's not exactly 800 is because we have those little triangles here. So not all of the polygons are actually four-sided on this model. Some of them are proper triangles, which is why the number is a little bit less than what we would expect. So yeah, this is just something to keep in mind. With polygons, it's very important to have either a three-sided polygon or a four-sided polygon. If you have anything more that has more than four sides, it means that you have something that is called an n-gon. So if we go back to this little slide here, n-gon, just remember them. Remember what they're called and remember that they are bad. So typically you don't really want to have them in your model. And the reason behind that is that they will be rendered the way Maya wants. So you don't really have any control over the way they will be rendered. Because what Maya will have to do, it will have to kind of subdivide it into a triangle and a proper polygon with four sides. And you don't really have any control over it, so Maya will just do it whichever way it wants, and you might be getting some really weird results during rendering. So that's why it's quite important not to have any n-gons, and make sure that your geometry is clean. So you will be hearing this a lot from different people throughout your studies and later on in your career. People will be referring to your model as clean if everything is nice and you don't have a lot of triangles and you don't have any n-gons. So triangles are usually fine to have, especially in the areas of the model where you're not getting any deformation. And just make sure that they render nicely as well, because sometimes a triangle can give you quite a nasty result as well. So polygons. And let's talk really quickly about the next mode. So we've talked about polygons, and again you have all the same functionality as with the rest of the modes. So you can select things and you can manipulate polygons like this, for example. So you can start, scaling things up and down, doing things like that as well. So there's, even just with those four modes, including the object mode, you already can start getting some quite interesting results. And the last thing we will look at is the object mode. So again, to be able to switch is right-click and hold to get this little menu and go to your object mode. So now we're back to this mode of manipulating things where you manipulate an object as a whole. So you can move it around like this, and you can scale it down, scale it up, do different things. So this looks like some sort of a lamp at this stage. Okay, so let's talk about n-gons again really quickly, just to show you what they actually are. I'm just going to select this whole edge and delete it. And I will delete it by pressing the delete on my keyboard. And I will show you what happens after that. So if we go into the vertex menu, you will see that, okay, Maya deleted our edge, but what it did, it also left us with a whole bunch of nasty vertices everywhere, which did not get deleted with our delete operation. So this is something to keep in mind. Your delete does not work for all of the elements equally. It will do different things for different elements. And so what we have here is technically an n-gon. It's a polygon by the looks of it, right? So it looks like a proper square, but in fact it has 6 vertices associated with it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's too many vertices for a polygon to have. So what we can do here, we can either start connecting those vertices again, and the only option for that is to use this multi-cut tool. So you should have it on your polygonal shelf. It's one of the ones that should be there by default. You can also try and find it in one of the menus. And I usually prefer not to, just because, as you can see, the menus are quite massive and it's quite hard to find anything here. So this is our multi-cut setting under Mesh Tools. So what we can start doing from here, just if you click anywhere by accident like I just did, hit backspace on your keyboard to get rid of that first dot. So what I want to try and do here is I want to try and hover over this vertex, and when it becomes red, it gets highlighted, means that my tool is connecting with the vertex properly. So click once, find the next one, and just make sure that you're not clicking on the edge itself, because otherwise you will be creating yet another vertex on this poor edge, which is separated in 2 at the moment. Click on this one, and you can keep clicking, so just if you wanted to connect them like this. And once you've done doing this, press enter on your keyboard, and so you've fixed your n-gons. So they're proper polygons now. They have 4 vertices associated with each of them, so they're good to go, while those guys are still pretty bad. So what we can do here, instead of doing what we were doing with those guys, we can go, and unfortunately you can't double click, so you will not be able to select all of them as a loop, because nothing is connecting them properly. They're rogue vertices, as I like to call them, or floating vertices, because they're just sitting there and it's hard to select them. They're useless to us at the moment. So what I want to do is to properly delete them and show you how to go about the other edge we just created. So let's go ahead and select all of them, and selecting with Shift. So to be able to select something, again, we've talked about it, go into your Q mode, and then just go and select them one by one, but don't forget to press and hold Shift to be able to continue selecting things. And if you need to deselect something, it's the same type of logic but with Control. So let's say I didn't want to select those 2, I'm just pressing and holding Control, or I wanted to select them back again, press Shift, hold it, and go and select whatever you need. So to get rid of the vertices, we'll go into a special menu by pressing and holding Shift and right-clicking and holding, so you can see the menu. So there is a lot of clicking and holding in Maya. And go to your delete vertex. And as you can see, this is one of those examples where Maya freaks out a little bit because it lost connection with whatever was happening on the screen, so we can undo it for a little bit. And it looks like we might have to do it one by one. So let's see if it actually works. In Maya, if you wanted to repeat the last operation, you can press G on keyboard. So G, 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 G. and G. But you will see that it also is getting rid of our other edges. So kind of is losing connection. And that's completely fine. So I know the model looks quite bad at the moment, so I'll just have to keep going. And you will see that at some point it starts breaking completely, so we might as well start fixing it properly. So I will be using the same multi-cut tool we just talked about, so that we give more information to Maya again. So don't really worry about breaking things in Maya. This will happen to you a lot, but you can always fix things. With enough time and enough motivation, you can fix anything. But of course, it's better not to do mistakes to begin with. So if you've clicked on something and it doesn't make too much sense, so you see that I clicked on the wrong thing, just don't forget to use your backspace. Backspace will kind of go back to the previous step. If it's a little bit hard to see what's happening on the screen, you can always uncheck your grid just over here. So I'm still just using G to repeat the last tool used, which is the multi-cut tool. And I'm just going around and fixing my model a little bit. And just for the ease of it, let's connect those ones like this. And let's say you wanted to somehow get rid of this angle here, so you, of course, you have an option of just continuing this line, which would be, in a way, a better option, just because it would make sure that we don't have any triangles. But we could also do something like this. So we would be terminating this line, right? Terminating meaning that we are kind of stopping it. So if we wanted to select this line, you will see that this is where it stops. It doesn't go any further when we double click on the line. And of course it stops over here. And we would fix this point in the same way. So we have a proper polygon, a four-sided polygon over here now, and we have a triangle here. You could also introduce another triangle, just depending on what kind of result you are getting out of rendering this guy. But this is pretty legit. So we fixed a couple of things. We've learned how to fix angons. So depending on how many sides they have, sometimes you can create two proper polygons or even more out of them. Sometimes you will have to use triangles to be able to fix our angons. So just keep that in mind. Normally you don't want to have them in your model at all. Okay, so let's talk about different polygonal shading now. So at the moment you can see the model looks a little bit off, especially if we zoom out, and that's because we have been manipulating things and we have been deleting things. It doesn't look too nice. So let's try and fix it up a little bit. So maybe add some hard edges and some soft edges where we want, and just talk about it for a little while. So by shading we mean the way the light reflects off the object. So as you can see here, it's quite soft, so we don't really have any hard edges, and it means that the normals, so each polygon will have a face normal associated with it, which I can show you how to actually look at it as well, because this is quite important to know. And by manipulating those face normals, we can manipulate the way the object is displayed, so the way the light is reflecting off it. But first of all, let's really quickly get rid of this line we created in the middle. And this time we will not be using delete, we will be using a proper operation for it. So the same thing as we did with the vertices before when we were pressing shift and right click, we'll do it with the edge. So shift, right click and hold and go delete edge. So what this does, it makes sure that we don't have any vertices left behind. So just remember that compared to using delete on your keyboard, this is a better way, meaning that you will not run into any problems later on where you have to fix those floating vertices. So what we can do now, we can start introducing harder edges to this model, because at the moment it looks like it's mostly smooth everywhere, but we can grab an edge over here, for example, and let's say we want to grab this one as well. So shift click, shift double click, and we'll go under mesh display for that. And there's a couple of different options. So you can set your own normal angle, or you can just use those two options, which is what I usually go with. I don't find much use, at least in my way of modeling, for setting normal angles, but you always have this option where you can specify the angle at which it will be reflecting the light. Actually, before we do that, really quickly, let's click on the model and let's go under display, and we'll go under polygons, and we're looking for face normals here. So you will see that these are our face normals. They are reflecting the light, so when the light hits them, it hits those polygons at a certain angle. Vertices themselves will also have their own normals, so each one of those little guys will have a normal as well. So this is like an approximation of all of those 4 vertices associated with this particular polygon. But those guys will have their own normals as well. And if you think about it, each one of those can have 2 normals associated with it, because this is one polygon and this is the other polygon. And so although it's just one vert, it can have multiple normals coming out of it. But you won't really be needing to manipulate your vertex normal for quite a while. So it's only useful for things like when you are working on different leaves for the trees or grass and things like that. So not really useful for us at the moment. But okay, so what we can do now, if you want to turn off the face normals, you can go back to our display and polygons and find face normals and just click on it again. So we can get rid of it. And let's go back to selecting things. So we have selected those 2 edges, and I want to make them hard. So I don't want them to look mushy or whatever the softness they're looking now. Let's go on the mesh display and just click on harden edge. And let's take a look at our model. So now we got this really hard edge right over here, while still having those edges nice and smooth, because this is the legacy of our sphere before, right? Because the sphere was quite smooth, it didn't have any hard edges on it. And so we can continue working like this and kind of giving a new look to our object over here, adding a couple of hard edges. So again, mesh display, harden edge. Right. So it gives you a completely new look, and maybe we wanted to add one over here, for example. I'm just going to press G on my keyboard to repeat the last command. Okay, let's say that maybe we also had like 4 edges over here and we hardened them. And you can see that, okay, overall the object looks fine. It's quite low poly, or low polygonal if you think about it. It doesn't have too many polygons. That's why some of the edges will be quite, look quite jagged. But so by accident we also hardened this little polygon over here, right? Let's fix it. So when we go back to our edge mode, you can see that it still is selected, which is cool, so we don't have to hunt for it. Then we can go to mesh display, and now we'll just harden this, we'll soften this edge now. So it should be fine, it should be fixed when you look at the object from different angles, you're not getting any weirdness. So sometimes for some modeling assignments you will find this quite useful, to work with different smoothing modes, different shading modes. We will talk about more advanced things in terms of smoothing and shading later on. But really quickly, let's talk about something that is called a reverse normal. So at the moment, all the polygons are facing into the world, into the outside world, so they're getting proper lighting. But sometimes when you start modeling, what can happen is that one of your polygons is facing the wrong way, so it's sort of like facing inside of the model itself. And to be able to simulate it, I will just break this for a second. So if we go under Mesh Display, and we are looking for this reverse command, so we've reversed it, and now it suddenly looks black. And if we kind of go inside the object, you will see that this one little guy is white, while everything else is black, and the way it should be inside of an object where there is no light. So something is wrong. Whenever you see something like this on your model, it means that your normals are broken. You can also check it by going back to our display menu again, and if we go into our polygons again and click on face normals, so I have it on my shelf here. If you don't remember, it's Control Shift and click on any command in the menus, and it will add this to a folder. So if I click FN, you will see that all of those have those nice little face normal lines sticking out of them, except for this one guy. So it tells me that something's wrong with it. And to be able to fix it, all you have to do is to select the face you are having a problem with, and go into your mesh display again and just click reverse. As soon as you see that the shading is the same as for the rest of the model, you know that you've fixed it, but also you can see that the line is going into the right direction again, which is cool. So we've fixed that little problem. So we've covered almost everything, but let's talk really quickly about extrusion. So this is going to be the first real kind of thing that you will be using on a day-to-day basis in your modeling career. And so extrusion works with polygons and edges as well. But let's start with polygons for this. So I'm gonna actually introduce more geometry to this particular polygonal loop over here. So if you remember the last time we really briefly looked into insert edge loop tool, which I have here, and you can also find it under, I think it was mesh tools, so insert edge loop. So let's try it out. It says click and drag on edges, which is exactly what you need to do. So just click, hold, and drag to where you want it to be. So I just want to create a tiny loop in the middle, something like that. And let's say I press Q to get out of that mode, and I'm going into my face menu. Let's say I want to select every second of those, just to make it a little bit more interesting. And now, so by default, you should have Control E assigned as your extrude tool. I will take a look if we have it here. So we have our extrude tool sitting on the shelf as well, just over here. And so it must be under Edit Mesh as well. So as you can see, by default, it's Control E. So let's try and use it. I'm going to press Control E on my keyboard. And usually you will mostly be working, when you see this gizmo, with the blue arrow, not with the other ones, because it gives you a proper direction. So it sort of will be kind of shooting outwards from those polygons, and it will be creating a new set of polygons. So you see what it does. It adds new geometry on top of what you already had before. And so from here, you could also switch to different modes. So this little blue guy kind of goes into the middle of all of the selections. It will give you an interesting result, which will be a little bit different to what you expected. As you can see, it sort of starts breaking your model. I don't usually work with that. And this is working with all of the elements selected, so it gives you a proper result you would expect out of it, really. So you can also see there's a couple of different options available to us in this tiny little window that it gave us. don't really use it that often, so you will see that the offset kind of lets you get really interesting results. Just makes it a little bit smaller. I would probably recommend when you're working with those things. So you can see I'm just clicking and dragging at the moment, but it doesn't give me a really precise result. So you can also click on Control, press and hold and Control on your keyboard, and then drag around, and you will see that now you're getting more precision out of it. Maybe you wanted to do something like this. Keep faces together is another interesting thing we will talk about in a second. So let's say we're happy with this extrusion. It worked the way we wanted it to work. Let's say for some reason we wanted to extrude those two faces. So by default, if we go and press Ctrl E, it gives us the option to extrude them together. If we had keep faces together off, you will see that now Maya is working with them as with two separate entities. So this can be quite handy for some of the modeling tasks. You can also, scale it up and down a little bit if you wanted to. You can also rotate things around, but usually, normally, I never work with anything except for the blue air, because that's exactly the type of operation I want. Or alternatively, if we deselect everything and just undo a couple of times, and I'm going to get rid of my face normals so that they don't annoy us, just click a fan over here. And let's say I wanted to extrude this particular part. So what I can do is Control and Shift click to select the whole loop. I won't be able to select this loop over here just because it's not a proper loop. It contains triangles, and Maya is not going to recognize them as a loop. So if I tried and double clicked, you see it doesn't select it. There is a handy little trick for paint selection, which is press and hold Tab on your keyboard, and it will give you this kind of new looking gizmo, or your cursor will change. And now if I just left click and hold, I can start painting my selection as well. So this is quite useful for situations like this. And let's say I want to extrude this now. So what I would normally do is press Ctrl E, and instead of using this gizmo, which will probably give me a somewhat weird result, so you can see how because it's going outwards and it's shooting from the face normal directions, it gives you a little bit more thickness now. So instead of doesn't look uniform compared to what I had before. So I'm going to undo this once. So I'm still in the extrude mode, so it has created a new set of polygons for me. But instead of using this gizmo, I will just go into my move tool by pressing W, and I will just move upwards. And so you can see that the size of this loop compared to this loop over here, I didn't change at all, which is maybe something that I wanted. So just something to keep in mind. You don't actually have to work with the extrude tool gizmo. You can extrude something and then work with your normal move tool gizmo for this. So this is your extrusion, and it already allows you to create a lot of different really cool looking shapes. And this is why it is quite important to know how to use extrude and where to find it. And let's say we wanted to have another one. So just play around with it. Make yourself comfortable with the extrude tool. Just notice that for a situation like this, don't use your move tool, use the proper extrude, because otherwise you will just be extruding into one direction. So this is really, really cool and really, really useful. I find myself using extrude pretty much all of the time, and we already learned how to make edges soft. So what we can do is just kind of in the perspective view, we don't even have to go into our front view, and just drag select all of those edges over here. Mesh display, soften. This is already looking pretty cool and interesting, whatever that might be. Maybe some sort of a mechanical detail. So extrusion is extremely cool, as I mentioned before, but it will trick you sometimes. Sometimes you will extrude something and you will not realize that you have extruded something. And this is where a lot of your problems will be coming from. Sometimes you will be seeing some really weird rendering results, or maybe when you deform your mesh, you will see that something's not quite right. It looks off for some reason. So let's say I do this Control E, and maybe I move it ever so slightly. So I moved it a tiny little bit, and you can't really see that anything is wrong with this. But when I smooth, so we haven't really talked about it, it's another way of previewing your models, and it's a really good way of finding those weird extrusions that we forgot about. So what I'm doing now is I'm pressing 3 on my keyboard, and it sort of subdivides all of the polygons, and where you didn't have any supporting edges, and we will be talking about it in the later videos, it will make it look really soft. So we're almost getting this kind of octopus looking effect. But you will also notice that one of those faces doesn't look like the rest of them, meaning that there is something wrong with it. And if we press 1 on your keyboard again, we will go into our proper low poly mode. So we have those two faces sitting on top of each other, and sometimes you would even be seeing some really weird kind of gradient shading on those elements that have double faces. And all we have to do with the face that we're kind of, you can also see the lines are a little bit thicker or looking a little bit different compared to the rest of them. So sometimes it's, quite hard to hunt for those things. So what we can do in this particular scenario, I would actually go into my 3 mode, and I would get rid of all of those faces instead of just getting rid of this one, because you still have 4 faces over here, which you don't really need. You just need this one face, right? So go and delete all of them. You can do it from your 1 mode as well. So if I delete this face and then I would go into my 3, you will see that there is still a couple of more faces than what we need. So I can get rid of those. So with faces, it's okay to press delete on your keyboard. That's all that I'm doing. When you're in the face mode, it's completely fine to use delete on your keyboard to delete things. When you're working with your edges and with your vertices, it's not fine to use delete. You always have to go and press Shift, right click, delete edge from here. Just undo it really quickly. So from my 3 mode, from the smooth mode, I will select all of those and I will press delete on keyboard. And so now we have created this hole, but it's really easy to fix it. So this is another tool you will find yourself using quite a lot, which is called the Append to Polygon tool. You should be able to find it under Mesh Tools. It's called Append to Polygon. I have it sitting on my shelf here, so this is what it looks like. And it allows you to fix holes like this or connect different elements together properly, different elements belonging to the same object. So not like you could have 2 separate objects and then try and combine them with the Append tool. I will not like this. So all we have to do is to click on one of the edges. Doesn't matter which one, so I will just click on the longest one because it's easier to select. And it's already given me some indication as to what can be connected. It's giving me those little error looking things. So I'm not pressing Shift or anything like that. I'm just clicking on the next edge. And you will see this pink polygon here. So this is just the preview mode. Maya is showing what it will look like. And I will press Enter to confirm. And it's fixed now. So you will see that this broke our shading a little bit. So we might just have to fix it up ever so slightly and go and harden that edge again. That looks completely fine now, and we've fixed everything. So just keep this in mind when you work with your extrusions. Be extremely careful. Don't just extrude things and then leave them as they are without actually moving your extrusions out. And always double check. So even now, although we're not really using the smooth mode, double check. There is no harm in doing so. Press 3 on your keyboard and just take a look at what kind of polygons you have. So all of the polygons are looking fine compared to going and like creating a bunch of extrusions and maybe moving them so slightly that you actually forgot about them. And then going into your 3 mode on your keyboard and seeing that, okay, I have created a bunch of things that I'm not using and they just make the model look ugly. So just go and make sure that you undo this. And so switching between 1 and 3 is something that you will find yourself doing a lot later on when we start learning about subdivision modeling. But for now, it's just a handy little trick showing you if something is wrong with your model. I will show you another couple of things later on as to how to see if your model has any n-gons. So we've talked about pretty much everything, and one last thing I wanted to show you how to do is to how to mirror things around. So I will just get rid of this object. From here, I will create a cube, scale it up a little bit, and as you can see, I'm working in my front view. And what I want to do is I want to create a line in the middle, and I actually want it to be perfectly in the middle. So we could use our inside edge loop, and I'll show you how to do that. So we could use this, and let's say hope that it's sitting on the grid, but we can see that it's not, so we have to snap this line. So just make sure that you have this whole loop selected, go back into your front view, and we've already used snapping before, so we'll use it again, but this time with an edge. So all of those operations are still available to you, even when you're working in different modes. So I'm just going to press and hold X on my keyboard, and I'm going to be using my red arrow, so I'm dragging along X-axis. And you will see how it starts snapping to those grid lines, and all I want to do is to make sure that this grid line is right in the middle. Also, for the mirror operation to work properly, your pivot point needs to be sitting in the middle of the object as well. So that's another thing we will briefly talk about, is how to center the pivot point. We know how to change it, so we've done that before. We pressed D, we moved the pivot point out, we pressed D again, and now we have a new pivot point. So if I wanted to rotate the object, this is what it would look like. But to be able to mirror, we kind of want the pivot point to be sitting in the middle of the 0 coordinates so that we can mirror it properly. So how do we bring this back, and how do we make sure that it's sitting where it needs to be sitting? Instead of doing it manually, we can use the center pivot point command, because we know that this cube is still sitting in the middle of the grid. We haven't really moved it, we've only manipulated this particular point. We know that if we centered the pivot point on this object, it would be sitting directly in the middle in the 0, 0, 0 on all of the axes. So for that we can go to modify, and we'll find the center pivot, and I recommend putting this onto your shelf. So I have it here, this is what it looks like as an icon. And if you click on it, it will bring our pivot point back to where it was before. So from here I can say that I'm happy with this object, I can freeze my transformations, I can get rid of the history. And I also want to get rid of, so let's say I work with this part of the object, so I'm worrying only about the left side of the object. And let's say, well, maybe what if I wanted to have some sort of a bevel on this edge or something like that? We haven't really touched bevels, but this is where it lives on your Polygon shelf. You should be able to find it in one of the menus as well. So it's just sitting under Edit Mesh. So if I click on it from here, it gives me this one huge bevel, but let's say that I wanted to make it slightly smaller, so I'm pressing and holding Control on my keyboard, and I'm kind of dragging above the word fraction. So let's say I wanted to have something like this. And as you can see, I could memorize this number and use the same number for the other part of the model. But what if I didn't? What if I made some other changes to the model, moved things around a little bit? So let's say maybe I moved those like this for some reason. Maybe just move this inwards a little bit. And I don't remember the settings for the bevel anymore, but I wanted to have the same stuff on the right side of the object. And why I refer to them as to left and right instead of properly right and left is because when you're working on your characters and your character is kind of facing you, it means that this is the character's left side, this is the character's right side. So that's how you can think about it. So what we can do is we can go into our front view, go into our faces, select, drag select all of them, and press delete on your keyboard to get rid of them. So we have this object here now, and as you can see the pivot point is still sitting where it needs to be sitting. And now we can mirror this geometry across. So we can go under Mesh, Mirror, and find options. So click on the option box. Mirror axis position world is fine. We're mirroring across X, if you think about it. So we just want to kind of mirror it over to the other side, so X is fine. Is it a positive or a negative direction? Well, we know that already. We know that where the arrow is pointing is our positive. So we want to mirror in the negative direction. Do we want to combine it with the original? Yes, we do. Do we want to merge the border vertices, so the vertices over here? Yes, we do. And the merge threshold is something that sometimes you will have to work with. Sometimes it will work just fine. So just hit apply and see what we've got here. So we mirrored it. We got the other half perfectly aligned with the original. So everything is fine. We also got this tiny little thing over here. So sometimes if you see that for some reason the merge didn't work quite well, you can make this number smaller. So sometimes you will have to go as low as 0.001 to be able to merge vertices that are sitting really close to each other. In this particular case, it worked fine, so I can just click somewhere on the screen and get out of this tool by pressing Q on my keyboard. And so what if you wanted to make sure that the vertices are properly connected? I'm going to be using my smooth preview again. So press 3 on my keyboard, and of course it will go all smooshy because we don't have any supporting edges, but what I'm interested in is the middle line. I can see that it's properly connected. Nothing is pinching, so there is no craziness happening anywhere, so that's perfectly fine. So this is pretty much how you mirror things across. Also, instead of using 3 to be able to make sure that everything is fine, you can also just go into your vertex mode, click on any of the border vertices, and just move it around. If it wasn't connected properly, as soon as you start moving into this direction, you will see a hole in your object. So you will see that it's not connected properly, and that's a whole different thing where you would have to go and select all of the border vertices and right click and go merge vertices and just merge vertices. You can also find this command under one of the mesh. It's quite hard to see, so you would use this command over here, so just merge. So we've talked about everything now except for one thing, which is world and object modes for gizmos. So let's talk about that really quickly. By default, when we first start using Maya, it should be sitting in the world mode. And by that I mean if we are in this move gizmo, so in your W, and if I press and hold W and left click and hold, you will see that it gives me this new little menu. And what I'm interested in is those two elements over here. So world and object. There is a difference which you will probably not notice until you start rigging or until you start building a skeleton for your object. So at the moment we're in the world mode, and I'm just gonna get rid of all of the history and freeze transforms. So we are moving this object according to its, according to the world's coordinates. So if you're confused about what the world coordinates are, you can also see this tiny little gizmo at the bottom of the screen telling you exactly the same thing as our move gizmo here. So it says that Z is facing this way, this is our X, and this is our Y. Same thing with the gizmo over here, right? Let's say we go into our rotate mode and just check it the same way we did with the W. So press and hold E, left mouse click and hold, get this little gizmo. We're in the world mode at the moment, right? So let's say we rotated this object, and now if we want to move it, we're sort of moving it still according to the world. But what if we wanted to move it across its middle line over here? So what if we wanted to move it into this direction and be really precise about it? So since we haven't frozen transformations yet and we gave it a little bit of a rotation, what we can do is we can switch to the object mode from here. So if you press and hold W and press and hold left click, and instead of using this world over here, we will use object mode. And you can see how the gizmo has changed. So it's aligned to the original alignment of the object. So we can still move it like this. And this will be quite handy in a lot of modeling scenarios. So just keep this in mind. Those are two different modes of moving. And one important thing to remember is that as soon as you freeze transformations on this object, doesn't matter which mode you're on, its object mode will be aligned with the world. So as soon as we freeze transforms, you will see that although I'm still in the object mode, it's aligned with the world now. So even if I wanted to move it according to its middle line, that information is lost, so you will not be able to do it anymore. There are ways to go about it and to trick Maya, which involves using groups, but this is a more advanced topic which we will be talking about later on in the future when we start rigging, because it's closely related to rigging. But for now, just remember that you have those two different modes, and sometimes you might want to use one of them. So it's exactly the same stuff for the rotate tool as well. So if I don't have this, the transformation is frozen, and I go and use my object mode for the rotate tool, you will see that it will be perfectly aligned with the original axis of the object. So I can manipulate it quite nicely like this, compared to having this gizmo sitting in the world mode where it's not aligned properly. So, you know, the rotation you will be getting out of this will be different to the rotation you will be getting out of your object mode. So just something to keep in mind. For the scale, if we go on to scale, I usually find working with either of them. Sometimes it might start complaining about baking the size information onto the model, and just make sure that whichever mode you're sitting, you switch to another one, and it should be fine. And same thing here. So as you can see, when we're in the world mode, you can only scale according to the world. So all the, that's what I was talking about before, right? So non-object space scale baked onto components. But as soon as we go back to our object mode, we can start scaling things nicely, and you will see that we can scale on different axes, or we can scale it as a whole, and nothing is happening, so Maya is not complaining about anything. So really, really useful to keep this in mind, and just remember how you can switch between different modes is by pressing on W or E or R, pressing and holding, and left mouse pressing and holding, and you're getting this tiny little sub-menu where you can switch between the world and the object mode. You don't really have to worry about the rest of those options for now, so leave them as they are. And if something weird happens and you switched something on and you're not entirely sure about it, you can always go back to your world or your object, right? So that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk to you about for this video. It's really important to understand everything that we have discussed, because for the next exercise you will be getting, you will have to find those errors, you will have to find the most common things that can trip you a little bit. So you will be looking for things like reverse normals, floating vertices, double faces, and n-gons, and you will have to fix them. So thank you so much for watching, and until the next video.